All right, guys, we are live for the 2023 August. I don't even know what day it is. It's the 10th, guys. It's the 10th all day.
Yeah,
Yep.
How's it
10.
going?
yeah. Good, man. Good to see you guys again. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
absolutely. Thanks for coming on, man. You're out. We're representing three different time zones tonight, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
It's just about 6
yeah,
p.m. here on the Pacific time.
Oh man, that's too early. It's already dark here, and I know it's dark where Deryck is.
yeah. 9 o'clock, man.
Definitely
Let me
so.
see.
Well, it's going to be a great show tonight. Tonight's show is sponsored by Primary Arms Online. We've talked about them before. If you haven't been to their website by now, guys, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice because it's definitely an awesome website for firearms, accessories, and alike. You can get all kinds of stuff from there. Derek's probably got like 18 things on his desk that have come directly from there, including the 1 to 6 optic that he had there on the table that we did so well with abusing through I think what 6 days, 7 days of a training event out in Wyoming. And I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but Derek's actually had the opportunity to, after we drug the scope around, they got dropped at different points. They bumped into rocks. They were spray painted and everything else. Deryck, you got back out and had an opportunity to put some rounds back down range. How was it?
It was still dead on. It's still dead on. And on top of all that, it was traveling, right? So it traveled out there in the case. I mean, the case had foam and all in it, but it was still, how they handle luggage. It wasn't like babied. And it got lost in Denver airport for a couple hours because of a belt backup. And it was zeroed out there and it came home and it was zeroed here. Still nailing, what was that? About I don't know, a 3-inch circle at 100 yards.
Yeah, no, definitely. They handled a lot of abuse.
Dead
I've
on.
got some video coming up with mine, with before shooting, during shooting, and certainly after shooting to kind of give you the full rundown on that. But those optics definitely held up extremely well. Good clear glass. That was their fourth generation, of that 1 to 6 optic. And by far, they made some pretty solid improvements on it. So I look forward to shooting it, to testing it more. I'll probably use it this hunting season as well to dispatch a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 hogs or so.
Nice.
Definitely
And,
so.
and like before this 1 to 6 from primary arms, like I was messing around with a 1 to 4 LPVO, and get this one's a six by, get 2 more extra notches to turn to, and it wasn't any heavier really than the 1 to 4 that I had on the rifle. So
Yeah.
and it was the other 1 to 4 was a Miata, which is great glass if you know sights, and I would say I couldn't tell any difference in the primary arms glass being not as good as the Miata glass in terms of clarity and eye relief. I mean, the eye relief on this thing was great. 4 inches and boom, every time, full field of view. Not looking through the little black, uh, hazy ring thing.
Is that the same rifle that you were rappelling off the side of a wall and the rifle's banging up against it? Now that's amazing, man.
Yeah. Oh, Barrett and I, so we did a zeroing exercise. What were we at, like 50 yards, Barrett, with the
Yep.
rifles? And Barrett and I we stacked 3 bullets on top of each other on each of our targets. He stacked his, I stacked mine. We had to have a vote to who had the better grouping. Barrett won, but I did my zeroing from the seated position. Barrett was prone, so
Just saying.
Very true. The Marine came out at him. He wanted to sit down for a bit.
yep.
I think we're looking forward to having you on again, Mike, for the show, talking about travel tips. I think it's going to be a good time, to be able to discuss some of the things that you do, some of the things that I do, some of the things that Deryck does to help, keep safe, ultimately as we travel around. And where are some of the places that ultimately that you have traveled to? Just in the past few years. I know you've kind of gotten out of the country a little bit. And so what are some of those countries or states or whatever?
Africa, Europe, Asia, Southern America, maybe going to Peru, within the next few weeks. That's coming down the pipeline. But specifically, Japan was earlier this year, had Morocco, London, Mexico City. Came back from Mexico City a few weeks ago. Maybe going back down to Monterrey, Tecate, Mexicali, Tijuana on a fairly regular basis. But yeah, whether it's by flight or by vehicle, a lot of the concepts remain consistent. And there's what I hope to do with this conversation is typically when I set up travel security for a client with my career in security, providing protection services, it's a wide gambit, everything ranging from travel security, executive protection, and so on. And there's different needs for different people, different types of clients, whether it's film and television. That's a wide range of things that need to be taken into consideration. You have different teams going out, from locations to the actual producers who might and higher up executives and such. And so the style of awareness or assessments that we apply when planning travel logistics, it adjusts to those lens. And what I hope to do with all those concepts is kind of translate it for the audience of how to do it for the individual, whether it's just you as an individual traveling, or whether you're traveling with family and friends, or you have to be accountable for more than just your own luggage and your own belongings and your own life for that matter. So property, body, or life are the things that are typically on the line. And yeah, with this conversation, we'll see where it goes. We'll do it live.
Yeah, Deryck, I know you've been a lot of places as well, some not so recent, but definitely have a past of traveling around the, world, right?
Yep. Yeah, I've been all over Europe, Mexico. That's it. Europe and Mexico are my big ones. Across the Nordic countries. When I was 17 during the Cold War, Deryck got arrested in Moscow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are you the
Nothing like
machine?
seriously that area. I was trading, like I was there playing hockey and we're trading, doing trades with the locals, and they didn't like the fact that I gave up some bubble gums and a jeans jacket for an East German flag, a military winter coat, and then a little can of Russian snuff.
That had little messages hidden inside of the compartment or something.
The only thing I got to keep out of that whole ordeal was the flag and the snuff.
At least you got the snuff.
I was going to say, at least you got your snuff. I know that made you happy.
But it wasn't kind of like the good kind of snuff that, like, back then I don't even think I was a snuff guy yet, but like back then their snuff was the you snorted it snuff, not the put it in your lip snuff.
Right.
Yeah, the real snuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had my first experience of snuff was with hape or rape. It's the indigenous stuff that they take a bird's bone and blow into your nostril. That's fun.
Ooh.
Yeah,
that was fun.
That sounds erotic, right? I don't know about that one, DeSargo.
Yeah, well, it's something that the hunters used to do for it. Produces acetylcholine, dopamine, and adrenaline in the brain, so you get hyper focus. So they use it either for night hunting or for deeper exploration, and we'll leave it at that.
So almost like an all natural pre-workout.
That's 100% what it is, man. And there's people that have been using it forever. And the main question is whether, because it's tobacco, but it's a different form than what the tobacco industry corrupts. And so the question is if it still does the same kind of damage. But there's old indigenous tribes that have been using it all their life. Not to say like, oh, my grandpa's been smoking for all his life kind of deal. But It's an interesting medicine, to say the least.
Definitely. So yeah, y'all got plenty of experience both in the country, out of the country. Most of my travel has been all over around in the country for the past few years, but have definitely spent a little bit of time in Mexico a few times over the past couple of years as well. Every time I get near Mexico, I've got a problem. I've got to head south for tacos. Yeah, DeSargo and I were in Tijuana, a little bit last summer.
Got to get the tacos.
That's right. I was in Juarez a little bit this summer, a little bit last summer as well. And so, yeah, I've got a little bit of experience as well down in Guatemala traveling around the cities and whatnot. But ultimately, I think that we should have a great show tonight, with lots of, different backgrounds and experiences that are ultimately going to be brought into it. But it's all about travel, travel safety, whether you're traveling outside of the country or you're traveling inside of the country, maybe just across town. There's definitely some things that are good to put in place and have in hand. And so, yeah, guys, where do y'all want to start tonight?
I'd like to start with mindset, because then we're done with the show, right? Just pay attention all the time and we're done. That's it.
Yeah, condition future. Right? Condition
So-
future.
The reason why I want to start with that, because my mind has recently changed about mindset. I've actually gone away from mindset, because when words have meaning, when we talk about mindset, then your mind is set, it's stuck, it's static, and that doesn't reflect the dynamics of life. And so what I like to teach nowadays is more mind state. You have to have an awareness of your mind state, because situational awareness isn't about mindset where you're always paying attention all the time. It's about learning how to leverage your cognitive flexibility, meaning knowing how to shift your attention and manage your attention from one item to the next. So we want to really consider our mind state, even in the planning stages. If we're going there on vacation, there's going to be times when you're going to want to take pictures of your family, and your mind state will be focused on capturing that photograph, getting your family together, getting them positioned. You're not really aware of pickpockets or potential threats, but there's a way to shift your attention and manage your attention accordingly. But so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, if that's consistent with what you guys are aware of. But ultimately, I wanted to open that up with situational awareness and what your guys' thoughts are on the whole mindset versus mind state idea.
I'm down.
I knew Deryck was going to have some thoughts on that. No,
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly it, right? It's, you absolutely, there are times that, we throw around buzzwords of proper mindset and awareness, and Deryck always kind of jokes around with like condition fuchsia, right? As long as you stay in condition fuchsia, you don't have to worry about anything. Condition fuchsia, I'm pretty sure, is toes in the sand and eating tacos or something like that.
Yes. That sounds amazing.
Somewhere around paradise, right?
Yeah.
But absolutely, to that, I mean, you definitely, where your mind is and the state of your mind is going to be a huge part of travel safety. And I think you brought that up, right? It's, I travel with kids a lot, right? I've got a couple of them. You've got kids, Deryck hangs around my kids sometimes and Rob's kids. So that kind of counts as well. But there's, in fact, I mean, I was on the road this summer for about 5,000 miles, if I remember correctly. And so, through that time, some with kids, some without kids, some spending with Deryck and all them. But, ultimately through that time, there was a tremendous amount of time that I was worried about photographs. I'm worried about framing the family. I'm worried about, capturing the moment, so that we can go back and look at it, later on in life. And through that, while my attention is on the camera and on the frame and on the kids and trying to get them to smile and everything else, what is my state of mind, during that? And, and to me, it's especially when you put me around, places that aren't my home with my kids, typically that state of mind changes a tremendous amount.
Right, because you're in a learning environment where there's a lot of things that you may be unfamiliar with. It's not quite routine. And that kind of brings us to the point of registering and recognition, right? And so to have situational awareness, the biggest problem with it, when people blame you for not paying attention, the reality is that you didn't recognize a stimulus that was supposed to be your spidey sense, right? There's a behavior that was outside of baseline that we didn't register. It didn't even process. Things just happened. I didn't even see it. I was blindsided by something, right? So let's take, for example, dining at a restaurant in, say, a foreign country where pickpockets or thefts are commonplace, and I put my phone on the table, which we typically do, right? I mean, if you're polite, you put it in your pocket, put it out of sight. But a lot of us tend to keep it on the table, which is rude to the people we're with, but it's a reality that we live with. And that paints you as a target where someone may come up with a map, seemingly harmless, put it down and ask you for directions, or maybe a menu or something if you're at the restaurant, and engage friendly conversation. And the pattern of behavior seems consistent with the dialogue, where they're putting the menu between your eyes and your phone, and you're engaging that conversation. And casually, as part of their natural body language, they'll lower the menu and pick up the phone with the paper on top, concealing it, and be along their way. And you may not even realize that it got lifted off the table. The registration should be that, first of all, you have something valuable on the table. Second is when someone is, for whatever reason, impeding your line of sight to your valuable on the table. So with mind state, that would be the first step to shifting your attention from the social debt, which is something that manipulators use. Let me explain what social debt is real quick. When I was single in my 20s, my buddies and I had this routine at the bar where we would go in and pay the bartender maybe $100 tip or something, and just say, listen, all I want you to do is, when I flag you down, give me a priority and I'm going to buy a drink. That's all I'm asking you to do, right? And if you see some hot chick at the bar, buy her the drink and say nothing, right? The bartender goes over, gives her the drink that she orders, and she expects to pay for it. Bartender says, don't worry about it. That guy paid for it, right? Without saying anything other than just raising your glass and then paying attention to the friend that you're with at the bar. In any case, most people don't want to be rude or impolite, so they'll at least be in the debt to come over and say thank you at the very least. So now the onus is on that person to engage in social conversation. It's less creepy. They're just coming over to say thank you. It's a nice gesture, and it's not threatening because they could walk away, right? So that's something that thieves tend to do. Thieves can create a kind of social debt. And so if they walk up to you, they give you a compliment, they walk over to your table, ask for directions, it seems polite to give them directions, especially if they're needy, if they're pleady, whatever the case may be. That could be a registration. It's like, okay, I'm going to be respectful enough to give this person what they need, but now my spidey senses are tingling. I'm going to be ready for anything. I'm going to look at my valuables, maybe even take the valuables off the table, and then now continue in paying off your social debt to that person, right? And this is how we shift our mind state. The first step to being able to shift your mind state from what you're doing is registering the red flags. And that's part of the planning process with your travel security. When we start examining certain countries, examining certain destinations, we can assess what kind of common behavioral patterns are with the crime statistics. If there's a high pickpocketing thing, whether you're going to Paris or you're going to London. When we talk about violence and talk about carrying, we know that guns are outlawed. So a lot of the violent crimes will be carried out with blunt instruments or edged instruments. So layers to planning, right? We got to plan something that may happen in the future and create some things to prevent that. But we also need to plan what we'll do when it actually happens. And that's part of the training environment. And so am I prepared to remediate violence of that nature? And that's something that you do if you're a part of personal defense network. The assumption is that you're probably doing some hand-to-hand, that you're probably doing some edged weapon, that you're probably doing some firearms training, right? So these are all things that are commonly get overlooked with our layers of planning for travel security. But circling back to the registration and shifting our mind state, to have that cognitive flexibility, we have to first, as part of our planning and assessment, is recognizing the behavioral patterns of the thieves, of the people who might engage in violence. There's the terrorist aspect, there's the unrest aspect, there's the criminal aspect. Doing all those assessments and assessing the behavioral patterns associated with each, if you choose to continue to travel to that destination, if they have some kind of travel advisory, right? So we used to have political unrest, a lot of protests that turned into riots, right? And we have the First Amendment. We have a right to vocalize our opinion. So it's not to say, well, that's going to turn into a riot, it's going to get violent, don't go. Well, you might want to voice your opinion, but you also want to recognize when the threat actors arrive on scene. And typically, they're masking their face, whether it's all black or whether it's khakis and a polo and baklava. And there's different profiles, but there's different uniforms that have typically occurred during these protests. And you see who the people are that instigated and escalated to the level of violence and mayhem. So recognizing and registering what those profiles look like, you can go out, you can protest, voice your opinion, exercise your rights, And when those red flags materialize, you shift your mind state to, okay, now we know it's about to get bad. I've made my opinion heard to the best that I can, but probably it's a better decision to boogie out at this point, right? And so, um, don't want to go too far off the handle because I'm going off different rabbit holes, but hopefully that's all relevant. And yeah, let me know if you guys, if I'm hitting the right spots, that there might be questions in the comments or any questions that you might have.
Well, I found the chat roll, Barrett, so I got that rolling over here. I don't have anything in there yet, but I am tracking that. But you bring up a good point with the social debt thing. Like when I first started teaching concealed carry, and I still do it from time to time here. We'll talk about out and about, and like what are we notorious for here in the U.S. still is holding doors for people, right?
Yeah.
And it's a habit of, you want to be, show good manners, be helpful, whatever. And I used to tell my students, hey, if you're going to hold the door for somebody, you really need to be mindful and pay really good attention to what you're doing. Are you putting yourself in a bad position by holding this door for somebody? Have you used your strong hand to hold the door? Should something go wrong and you need to get to one of your tools, have you now all of a sudden you have to let go of something to go do something else? So there's
Absolutely.
a balancing act of, is this the time to do it? Is this not the time? And then when you're on the road and like in other countries, in some countries, like holding the door for somebody is like really, really, really an odd thing where people will actually put on the brakes and look at you and like not walk through the door because you're holding it for them. So, learning the culture or learning what's acceptable in the different places you travel to.
Yes, absolutely. You hit it right on the head. And we'll start with that with, when it's property, body, or life, we're talking about life in this regards, where if something bad happens, someone leveraged social debt, and then you had to make that plan of, am I using my weak hand and strong hand to protect my life and access? Is it the most efficient way to do things? So in certain countries, there's a bit of a scamming pattern. For example, certain places will walk up to you and offer you guidance to where you need to go, whether in a marketplace or something rather. And it may seem harmless, right? Where do you want to go see? And I'll take you to that vendor that you're looking for. If you're looking for a specific exotic item, whether it's like a specific tea set or a specific exotic rug, say, oh, I know the guy, I'm going to go here. And you'll think, oh, these people are super friendly, right? And at the end, you'll be obligated to tip, or they're going to ask you to tip, or for one reason or another. And for whatever reason you don't, then everybody else just materializes out of nowhere. Somehow, some way, everybody comes out and you're surrounded by people, and there's a show of force that you should probably tip before it escalates to violence. So that's something to take in consideration, is typically try to be self-sufficient. Try not to owe anybody anything, right? And because even if you tip, if you're wearing anything, or if you take out your cash, because a lot of times what happens with travelers is they don't memorize the exchange rate. They exchange a bunch of money, they put it all in their wallet. When they go to tip, they take out maybe a low denominator, but then they see all the rest of it. And then gives them an opportunity to ask you for more. And you don't know how much you're giving out. Then later you go back, it's like, oh crap, I gave that guy $100 US dollars. Right? I didn't know. It's just a lot of currency I was handing out, right? And so with your cash, try to keep it separate. The cash that you're going to expose, I typically keep my about 300 equivalent US dollars in local currency. And then I keep maybe less than $50 worth of USD in a separate pocket or separate wallet. And then I keep maybe $20 loose in my pocket. So that way, when I have to take cash out of my pocket, they're only seeing it. I know it's maxed out at the equivalent of 20 US dollars. So I'm only exposing a limited amount of money, if that makes any sense. So that's one of those things that you can plan for is, okay, I want to prevent the opportunist. And then also I want to be respectful, but I also want to be self-sufficient. So I'm not indebted to anybody, right? Another scam that people have, I think this is also in Europe, where they might have a music performer and they'll place their cup in a high traffic area where tourists are not paying attention to where they're stepping. And what happens is you incidentally kick it over. And so you feel bad, they pick it up, they're trying to pick up whatever change they have, and they manipulate you into owing them a tip because you just knocked over their stuff and stopped their performance. And if you hang out long enough, you'll see them restage it and look for more tourists and put it right where they're going to kick it. And so these are all things that you have to take into account. You can still be respectful, but it just register that idea that the way that you get played is by leveraging social debt. And so if you can be respectful, but also be cognizant of being overly polite and giving in to having to owe people something, right? With train stations, a common thing is people will crowd the doors, and with your baseline here in the US, we tend to give people personal space. And even with the traffic as well, right? Unless you live in Los Angeles on the 405 during rush hour, then of course you're bumper to bumper. But one of the reasons why I love driving in Mexico, because vehicles have no personal space. So it's like you're up and tight and it's hyper aggressive and it's just normal, but if that happens here in the States, some people look at it as road rage. Our perception is a bit different, right? Our social norms are a bit different. So when we get on transit in the United States, we tend to have a bit of personal space, but when we get in other countries, it might be tight. There might be a lot of people making physical contact. And a common strategy is to block the doors. So you have to make physical contact coming in. And it's usually a team, typically females, because they're less threatening. But it can be a wide range. It might be elderly people, but they'll crowd you and you get a lot of physical contact. And what that physical contact does is it camouflages their access to your pockets or to your purse or to your backpack. So some quick travel tips that you can do is either travel with zipped up pockets or register that red flag that the second you're in a place where there's a lot of physical contacts, just start putting your hands over your valuables so you can feel what's happening around that area, right? If you're concerned about RFID, you could get RFID wallets. The near field communications thing is a real deal, where there's devices that you could just put near someone's purse or pockets, and if their wallet is there, then they can start charging your credit cards right off the bat. And so getting something that blocks that kind of communication isn't a bad idea. These are all different strategies you can use, but you got to register the threat behavior, right?
Yeah,
so that's, yep.
I was just saying, even talking, in pickpockets, I don't think a lot of people realize how many professional pickpocketers that are out there, not just in other countries, but, here in bigger cities, right? Just at Mardi Gras of this year, you had all the professional, you had all the local pickpocketers, but you had people that were coming in from other countries that were hanging out on Bourbon Street and were, taking phones and wallets and everything else very quickly before anybody had an opportunity to even register it. And I know of one individual that working in law enforcement witnessed the pickpocket, immediately was able to put his hands on the pickpocketer, and the item was already gone. Like, he witnessed it, and it was already gone because it was that quickly was completely handed off to someone else. But these were people that weren't even citizens of this country, and yet they were here, during Mardi Gras to be able to capitalize on it. And when they looked further into it, I mean, this guy had been to the Super Bowl, he had been, to Mardi Gras, and I think New Year's Eve, he just come from like New York or something like that. So, I mean, literally just kind of bouncing around. And it's, it's obviously it's going to be all over Europe, but it's, but it's all over here. It's all over here in the US. And so that's definitely something, like you said, zipped up pockets, something that puts that extra layer in place that prevents someone from easily being able to distract you through physical touch or through anything else and be able to quickly grab your items.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head, man. And there's one thing, the distraction, right? I've been nerding out on Jake Weskerchen's from Walk the Talk America. He has a video on emotional functioning, and outstanding. I highly recommend everybody go to YouTube and Google emotional functioning from Zephyr Wellness. But the reason why I bring it up is because there is a distraction strategy that polarizes you. It gets you so emotional that you stop thinking about things, and then it triggers an emotion, and the threat actor is actually a hero. So here's how it works. Get mustard packets, right? You walk up to a guy or a gal and you see something of value, and you squirt the mustard packet on their leg or near where that valuable is, or I'm sorry, the opposite side of where that valuable is, but in and around the area. You take out tissue and you start trying to communicate in your broken English that a bird pooped on a person, right? And so you already have the tissues in hand. You look, you see like this yellow, nasty substance that gets you immediately grossed out and disgusted. You're trying to think about how to wipe it, and the person already has the solution for you. And all you're thinking about is getting it off. Your emotions are full of contempt and disgust for this nasty thing on you. And so that gives them, you just give them permission to pat you down, get physical contact. And now you're grateful. It's like you're hyper focused, you're fixated on that thing as they lift your valuables out of your purse or your back pocket kind of thing. And so emotions are also an indicator. Emotions signal a change in your environment, and it only lasts 3 to 9 seconds. The only reason why we feel that it sustains longer than that is because we're either dwelling on something in the past or anticipating something in the future. So with proper emotional functioning, if you do get pooped on, you're like, ugh, okay, I recognize what I need to do, but now I got to let it go so I can expand my awareness. That's one of the amazing things about perception, is your aperture actually opens up when there's less stress involved, and hyper narrows when there's a high level stress involved. That's what a lot of people call tunnel vision, survival positive in the worst case scenario. But I'll try not to go down that rabbit hole right now. We can certainly chase that another time.
So you're saying it's actually a survival positive that I don't like people touching me.
100%, man. 100%. To some degree.
Like, why are you so weirded out by people touching you? Now I'm like, you know what, man? It's a good thing, because you know what? It keeps me from getting pickpocketed or anything like that.
But I do have to clarify, it's not that you don't like people touching you, it's that you don't like people outside of your tribe touching you.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like, obviously, if my woman puts her hand on my back, I'm not gonna be like, oh, don't touch me, But I'm talking about people I don't know. I don't like. But that's the thing when you travel, right? Like, we like in the U.S., personal space is the thing, and like if you're standing in line at McDonald's or some store and somebody's standing like way too close to you, and you turn around and say, hey, could you give me some space?
Right.
The only person that's going to be offended is the person that's standing too close. Everybody else around you is probably like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody would do that.
Yeah.
But like
right.
saying, like I was in Turkey. This was like in the 90s, and on a train, and it was like literally like cattle car. Like we were smushed in this thing. And I've seen similar like videos of like trains in India.
That's
like,
Mardi Gras, man.
And like I remember the woman I was dating at the time, like losing her mind because somebody was grabbing her butt, and you couldn't tell who it was because everybody was just like sandwiched in there. You couldn't even tell who was doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the social norms and everything, and people who consider that unusual, right, probably come from a genetic line of safety. And so this is something super interesting. It's kind of like when you have kids and you try to teach them to sleep in their own room outside of the parents' bed. It's a very unnatural thing, because in the wild, like the parents have to stay close to their kid because they could get by a dingo or something, right? And so it's kind of an unnatural thing to be able to have the safety and security to put the baby in a separate room entirely than from the parents and not have to worry about it. It's kind of the same thing with personal space. Is that's a survival positive thing, and people who come from being sheltered or safe, which is not a bad thing. I'm gonna say that in a condescending way. They're not conditioned. They don't have the reflexes. They don't have that registration that this should make you pay attention. So immediately when someone's close to you, your defense mechanisms, which is a survival positive, immediately kick into high gear. And I'm very much the same way. And so it's if you're going to a country, so in my job, we have to really blend in, right? And so I may not have the luxury of moving away or requesting that personal space. So I have to overcome that and just start understanding what the baseline is, and just start monitoring other indicators of a threat, right? And so property, body, or life. And we've been talking a lot about property, and we talked a little bit about life, but same thing with sexual assault or rape. There's some indicators there that we have to watch out for. Specifically when we're traveling, there's a lot of tourists want to have that overseas fling, and so they might be a little bit more liberal with how much they're drinking, and and what they're drinking and where they're going, not really taking their safety into account. And in that regard, it's always good to have a designated defender to make sure that the person that you're leaving the bar with is the person that you actually selected, and that that person is not being selected by somebody else. It's just the most basic way to mitigate that risk. If the person didn't tell the designated defender that that's the person I want to hook up with, then don't let them leave with anybody else. It's a really easy way to think about it. There's more complex strategies, but that's like the simplest way to go about that business. Obviously, the whole thing with drinks and protecting your drinks and all that good stuff. But what I hope to do is provide some unique information. Things like hotel stays. All right. This is something that we've talked about in the past, I believe, with staying in a hotel, rather than being on the first floor because it's the most accessible, being on the second or third because it's not so far from evacuation that should a fire or some other disaster occur, it's not such a long trek to be able to escape the hotel, second or third floor. And one of the biggest threats to your property inside the hotel is going to be housekeeping or unauthorized access. Because if you're in an Airbnb or if you're in a hotel, you're not the only one that has access to that room. So it's not a secured room, regardless of the locks that are installed by the owner. Right.
So what do you do on that? What do you do to, to put other layers in to help secure it?
So when I'm leaving the hotel, I would typically put some kind of deterrent. So basic fundamental security principle is deter, detect, delay, right? And so
Right.
I use a little mobile UV camera that has some LED lights that reflect and flash, and it basically shows that it's recording. So almost every hotel that I've stayed in, the second you open the door, there's some kind of table or something that you could put that on, that could be the first thing that you see when you walk in the room. Is the second someone opens the door, they'll see a camera pointing right at them, right? Something with hotels is that they have a captive portal, and that could boot it off the internet and Wi-Fi. One way to get around that is to get a Wi-Fi extender. That does a couple of things.
Yeah.
You don't have to log into any other captive portals. You just log in straight into the Wi-Fi extender, and it tends to keep it logged in, so you don't have to repeat the captive portal where you put in your last name and room number, kind of deal.
Yeah,
But
I travel just, I bring my AT&T hotspot and connect the camera to that AT&T hotspot and take it out of, the wireless for the hotel. Obviously, this works in the country,
Yes.
and you can run into the other issues outside of the country and outside of cell phone service and that kind of stuff. But yeah, when I have the option, I take it away from the hotel Wi-Fi
Yes.
and put it on my own hotspot.
Absolutely.
I from a cybersecurity standpoint, like we're talking about physical and stuff like that, but like I just had my debit card. Somebody just got a hold of my debit card number somehow and spent $119 at Wingstop.
Yep.
Like you
They had
spent
a good time.
$119 at Wingstop. I don't know, but
Maybe that wasn't me.
party that I was not. But by just using the hotel Wi-Fi, you're opening yourself up to a lot of personal information going over that line. Like they can get credit card numbers, they can get login
100%.
information. If you,
And that's that leads me precisely to the next step in the tools I use in the hotel, because typically corporations should be able to build their own VPN. So let me first define something. There's anonymity and privacy. And anonymity got to work on my English here, conceals who you are, because identity theft is a thing, right? The privacy conceals what you do. And so those are two things that we want some level of confidentiality with, right? And so encrypting your data as it transits is a thing. And yes, if the individual uses something like Proton VPN or some commercial VPN, they are sending their information to someone else's computer. So now comes the idea of risk and benefit. Are you more at risk by a threat actor that's trying to steal your money and identity, or a corporation that their business is based on providing a VPN and them selling your data or giving it to a nation state? So, I mean, if you're like a terrorist, you probably don't want that, or something, right? Or if you're some kind of drug dealer, you probably don't want that. But if you're an everyday person, I mean, I'm exaggerating. There's other situations. If you want to be completely off grid, it makes sense to me. But ultimately, you have to have the know-how, right? You have to have the know-how and capability to build your own VPNs, to build your own servers, and build your own encryption. So that way you own everything and you can conceal both your identity and what you do online. But for the everyday person, Proton VPN,
Right.
never trust Wi-Fi. Use Proton VPN. I think the risk is low of you having a negative impact for you using an everyday person using a commercial VPN.
Yeah, I mean, I've got, all my devices are set up to automatically, use it. In fact, I even run a VPN, most of the time at home as well, unless, I intentionally, turn it off at that point.
Yeah.
And
Like right now, the only thing in my house is not going through the VPN is this broadcast right now, and it's purely because when you add a VPN, as you guys know, and viewers probably don't, you do have overhead that is associated with that encryption, so it will slow your
Yep.
connection down. Now, if you have a gigabit connection like I have here, it probably would be good enough for the show, but we've had technical difficulties and stuff like that. I don't even want to risk it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got mine off for the show as well. All right, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. One, apparently I'm wearing a psycho color. So John says that Barrett's wearing a psycho color, but he also said that Deryck's head's glittering. So thanks, John. Thanks, John, for the comments.
I'm glistening when the sun comes out.
That's right. But we did get a question coming in as well about, manner of dress when traveling. And, I think this is a really good question. It's one thing, like, each time that last couple of times I've gone to Mexico, I've done my best to attempt to blend in, right? And you want to kind of fit the norms. Now, you see me, right? I don't look Mexican. I don't.
You actually do. You actually do.
Hispanic at all. And so, even with me trying to blend in, there was a lot of, hey, gringo, come here. I still stuck out like I was carrying a big red flag over my head, waving it, and going through Juarez. But so, I think that, what you're wearing, obviously, that was already brought up by Mike was, when it comes to pickpocketers and that kind of stuff, you want to make sure you've got zippered pockets or, tighter pockets, hard to reach pockets, something you can easily cover, something that somebody's not easily being able to get their hands into, right? But I think that it's also important to try to, to play the part as much as possible if it's something that's important. And I think that when you're traveling to areas that there's a higher risk of, whether it's assaults, sexual assaults, physical assaults, or, something just property crime, the more that you blend in, the less that, you are sticking out and could easily become victim of.
And there's the challenge. Obviously we don't want to broadcast wealth. We don't want to broadcast value.
Right.
So we try to blend in, right? But there are certain circumstances, say if you need to go to business dinner and you need to show success. So you need to have a nice watch on, you need to have a business suit on. So, and for whatever reason, you need to take some kind of transit because you don't have a rental car. You're not controlling all that. And so a solution to that is to have an overcoat, assuming that it's cool enough for that, right? But you basically got a Clark Kent Superman that, depending on your risk profile. If you're going in, you need to go to a high crime area to meet with, or you have to transit through it for whatever reason. Like in New York, it's easier to take the train, but the train stops by some not so great places, right? So these are some. I have a buddy that lives in New York, and I always give him crap when he comes out to LA. I don't want to walk in public with him because he draws Asian hate, and so that's kind of a thing, right? It's like, well, you might go through some areas where there's a lot of Asian hate, bro. I don't know if I want to walk next to you, man. But there's things that you can do to cover yourself up a little bit more, reduce your profile. And it really comes down to the question of how do I dress comes down to, well, what do you want to do? And then you want to facilitate, that's that safety third idea. Once we identify what you want to do, what are the risks involved, and how do we mitigate those risks? And so when it comes to Mexico, I highly recommend against wearing anything shooty like 511 or any military apparel, anything of that nature. There's been quite a few former or current military that has run some errands and crossed the border for the cartel, you know, and it's easily get mistaken by both law enforcement, federales, marinas, or just everyday people. If you're coming out, even a sling bag might seem harmless, but that's a commonly used item down there, and you don't want to be. The case of mistaken identity is significant. There was an old case of a security company who was riding in Suburbans, and they got shot up, killed everybody except one person. Were able to interrogate that guy, found out that there was security for a corporation, and they released him to send the message to the rest of the maquiladoras or manufacturers that their security must have identifiers on them, so they don't shoot first, ask questions later. And that's just one of those things. Case of mistaken identity is a real threat. So how you dress and what vehicles you use or what mode of transit you use, what kind of items and tools you use that may identify you, is something to take into consideration, whether you want to broadcast wealth or if you want to broadcast that you're an everyday person. There was a situation in another country, and they have this kind of like onesie that they throw over. It's called a jalaba. It's kind of like a robe kind of thing. And if you had to go out there by yourself and you're in a high crime area and you had to do some things and you had to hurt some people and you need to evade other people because you stand out, like if it was you, Barret, and you had to drop some people, having one of those jalabas in your backpack might help you, because that easily conceals your westernized clothes, with the exception of your shoes. And easy solution: take off your shoes, because it's not uncommon to walk barefoot.
Well,
right?
I'll fit in.
There you go, right? Mr. Close in the stand over here.
Who said I was wearing shoes?
Joke's on me, you don't own shoes. But
just kick those puppies off and keep going.
Yeah, but going back to how you appear, your body language broadcasts a lot. I'm Filipino. When I go to the Philippines, they know I'm American. Doesn't matter how much Tagalog I speak, because my body language and the way I move and the way I sit, it broadcasts who I am. And so a good idea if you go into a foreign country is monitoring their gait, or how people walk, how people sit, their demeanor, right? You could see people when they communicate in their native language, they might, how people talk with their hands, right?
Right.
Whether the chin rises or whether they lean in, when they accentuate things, whether they pop their chest up. These are all subtle cues that tell you what culture you come from. And so that's part of your dress. It's not just about your clothes. It's also about how you behave. All of that goes to what you're broadcasting, because you could try to conceal your clothes, but you could still be spotted a mile away simply by the way you walk. Simply by your gestures, with your hand gestures or your head gestures, it might give it away. So, I mean, that's getting really deep in the weeds of things, but I wanted to make sure that I presented some ideas that maybe haven't been presented before that I think is worth consideration.
Definitely. What are some of the other modes of protection that you may favor in different places that would not typically allow you to carry a traditional defensive tool?
Yeah, I mean, get that a lot, man. And it really comes down to, I can't stress enough, that you as a human need to learn how to fight, right?
Right.
Like, once you understand the human body and how the brain works, and you subject yourself to violence for a hobby, then that builds a certain air of confidence, because even in medicine, right? And when you learn medicine, you learn what not to do, because it could kill somebody. It could injure somebody with malpractice. Like, look up all the malpractice. That's how you fight, right? There's certain things that you can do. You're not powerless without a gun, right? And so that, first and foremost, I wanted to get that out of the way. It's just like, get some kind of defensive training. So if you do a few, like 6 months of Muay Thai, maybe a year or two of blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu, get some grappling, get some striking, get fundamental understandings of edge weapon. Aaron Giannetti has by far the best edge weapon program that I've seen as far as countering edged weapons and such. I like it. I mean, I might be a bit biased, but as unbiased as I can be with looking at what he's actually doing, I dig it, man. I recommend that program. Blunt instruments, so Filipino martial arts with the sticks and stuff, gives you some fundamentals. I mean, all these martial arts, the problem with it is that the more complex the skill set is, because it's accounting for the counter for the basic skill set. And the reality is most of bad guys have just the basic, like, and they're talking about this strike or this trajectory or this overhand strike with the stab or something, right? And so if you take there's value in martial arts training, but then you tie it together with the context of defensive training, right? That's how you tie it together. Once you habituate that, then you register violence in your brain. You register what you're capable of. All the people, I just did a video with the ghost reload or the simulating the reload, right? And naturally the internet's going to internet and comments going to comments, and people are like, well, you wouldn't need a reload. Statistics show that 7 to 10 rounds, the fight is over. It's like, okay, I guess we shouldn't practice reloads then. Right? But a lot of people can't wrap their brain around, well, if you're out of bullets, you're screwed. You better run or you better do. No, you're not. You can stay in the fight, man. Because the reason why you're shooting back is because you couldn't run away. That's the whole premise. Right. You don't apply lethal force unless there's no other option. So think about that. There's no other option. You can't run away. You can't evade at that point. You better figure out a way to bring the fight, right? So I had to get this out of the way because the gun is the most efficient tool for personal defense. It's not your only tool for personal defense. You are the tool for personal defense.
Sometimes it's a worse tool for personal defense. And I mean, we see plenty of videos where people are bringing firearms into play.
Yeah, and look at that. You just did smoke bomb, man.
So I've lost my video. Can y'all still hear me?
You can lose your video. You just put on your stealth mode.
I just watched the camera turn off. So watch this. We'll bring in, I'll bring in a little bit different angle. Y'all can't see it, but I've got a little bit different angle up while I attempt to pull the other camera back into play. But yeah, I mean, the gun is, only going to be a tiny part of it. Like I was saying, I mean, there's times that people try to pull a gun out into a fight that's the worst thing that they should be going for right now, when they really should be trying to control the other individual or control the other individual's weapon, right? And, we carry firearms for personal defense, but there's plenty of places I go that I can't take the gun, whether that's just from, month-to-month travel on an airplane or something like that, where the gun's not allowed, the knife's not allowed, the pepper spray's not allowed, the taser's not allowed, where none of this is allowed. That doesn't mean I'm unarmed, right? And I think that the number one weapon that you get to take with you is your brain. It's making good decisions.
Yeah.
Right. And and outside of that, the one thing that you have available to you is is going to be your physical skills that ultimately that you've developed. Right? And getting enough that you can protect yourself. There's one of the stories that I'll tell in my classes and whatnot, where, a couple of years ago, you had a individual who pulled out a can of wasp spray, because everybody thinks that stuff works, but this was the attacker. So the attacker pulls out a can of wasp spray inside the New Orleans International Airport, and in the TSA security lines. You got people walking through security. This guy walks up, pulls out a can, kind of hoses down, the individuals in the environment, and, ultimately pulls out a machete and starts hacking at people, right? So there you are, you're in the TSA line. You got the guy with the machete who's literally attacking people at contact distance, hacking away. You don't have a gun. TSA screeners certainly don't have guns. You don't have your knife. You don't have this. You don't have that. So what are you stuck with? Well, you're stuck with the ability to either A, use your brain and potentially get away from the attacker, or B, you got to be able to physically handle yourself, right? And move in, to stop the aggressive behavior.
And you hit it on the head with the machete scenario, because that goes back to our assessment and your planning, right? Where our plausibility changes based on where you're traveling to. There's plenty of places where machete fights are still a thing. Latin America, certain parts of the Caribbean, certain parts of Africa, right? Like the machete thing is still a thing. And so if you train those martial arts, you're familiar with contact weapon or even defensive tactics. That's a common thing with defensive tactics, knowing how to stay just outside the reach and then being able to close the distance rapidly. That puts you in a certain level of comfort where I can remediate this. I can manage this, because the question is always going to be like, this is my go-to tool outside of myself and whatever I trust in my teachers and what they teach me as far as martial arts and fighting goes. But this tool has never been confiscated. It's a surefire stiletto. If I shine it, it's 1,000 lumen. It can disrupt vision. It's not going to incapacitate by that. It's not going to incapacitate by just blunt, but it's a force multiplier in the sense where I could still hold a clenched fist and I could still strike with it. And if I needed to run up on somebody, if I'm familiar with that machete, I can disrupt his vision, get him disrupted enough that I could close that distance and start working with dismantling their grip on whatever tool they have, whether it's a gun. I mean, it's very difficult with a gun. But again, if you have no other option, if the other option is, I guess I'll just die, then you better start figuring it out, right? Make the other person pay.
Well, guess what? I mean, you've had about 20% of the active shooter incidents that have been stopped by unarmed civilians. Right?
Man.
And so, again, if they've got a gun and you don't have anything else, and you've got the ability to be able to do something, you got to, use violence, take action.
And again, going back to the destination. So in the States, the what drives that is they're looking for easy targets, right? They're not expecting a fight. They're expecting a one-way range.
Right.
And so when the fight comes to them, easy day. Down in Mexico, it presents a problem because the separation between robbing and killing isn't that far down there, right? And so, I mean, they can
give
walk
people,
up.
Kind of an idea, right? And it's just choosing somewhere that's touristy like Tijuana. We look at New Orleans, and I think we're at the top as a murder capital right now. We're a tiny city. We're way less than 1 million people, less than 500,000 people, I think, most years since Hurricane Katrina. But we see about 250 murders per year, and somehow per capita that puts us up there, right? And then you look at something like Tijuana, that on a violent year, they're like at 10,000, in one city. So, like you said, that separation between robbery and murder is, it's not the same as what you're going to find in New Orleans, where, most people who are dealing with armed robbery on a daily basis are going to be at their house at night.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that this is a generational transmission of murder, where like I got out in 2017 or so. I still go down there and occasionally I'll pick up work, but I used to be full-time. And 2017 was its record-breaking year. And that's still being broken to this day, as far as the murder rate. And literally back then, they didn't have enough room in their morgues. They're stacking bodies outside, and they just didn't have the resources at that time to account for all that. So people were literally getting away with murder. And in the old days, it was known that, I say old days because I haven't checked recently, but at least before, they would recruit children. And there was a process of teaching them how to kill animals and groom them to become sicarios, right? And so that just becomes the norm. And then, like, we could just spend a few days down there and we'll come across a body kind of thing. And so when someone intends to rob you, they're already afraid for their own life. And so it's not beyond them to escalate from robbing you to killing you kind of thing, right? And so if you bring the fight, like, get the training, man. The fantastic thing that happens with those active shooters is the swarming effect. When you inspire others to act and engage, when it's a one-on-one robbery, you're on your own for the most part. And so I highly recommend everybody consider those scenarios if you're traveling to those kind of countries, and be ready. A lot of people talk about training for the worst case scenarios, but their training methods reflect them as a hero. They're choreographed, they're doing it, and they're doing it again, they're rehearsing it again. They're not planning for the unexpected. And this is kind of a relatively modern training method in sports. What they found is, like, I'm going off the handle because I get kind of passionate about this, right? But hopefully we'll have time for this, but it'll be worthwhile. With like football plays, right? They draft up the play, the receiver or the tight end goes out, they run a route, they catch the ball. So they plan it, they rehearse it, they catch it, they're awesome in practice, right? What they're finding now is that we need to train the brain to not assess, plan, execute, but assess, plan, execute, forget, and do again. So what I mean by that is now you're in the game, the ball's hiked, you run your route, but now you have a defender fucking up your route. Am I allowed to curse on this? I'm sorry. I'm passionate about it. So I got to remember to, like, dial down my passion when I talk about this stuff. But So now you have someone disrupting your route and disrupting what you want to do. So now you have to forget what the original plan is, adapt around it, and try to figure out how to stay on the same path in time to catch the ball. So you're kind of forgetting and you're improvising at that point. And that's what's missing a lot in firearms training, is that a lot of firearms training is rehearsed, it's staged, 2 shots here, 2 shots at that target. You're not preparing for the unexpected. Your first shot isn't from an unexpected position. And then your multiple target engagements, it doesn't come from an unexpected orientation to the target, whether you're moving and have to stop moving. There's all these other elements that are unexpected, unplanned, that you're going to have to plan, do, forget, and then assess, plan, do. That's the value of being able to move laterally. Now assess your positions to target, extend out, punch out from this unrehearsed orientation to the target. That's what transfers over. I'm going to write an article soon. It's on record, so now I have to follow up about contextual interference and how it diminishes your performance in practice, but it actually helps you win more games.
So what date should we expect it?
I know, right? Hold me to it, man. Give me a date, because if I don't get a date, then I'll get it done. When do you guys want it by?
Before the end of the tour.
Okay, I could get that done. Cool.
Yeah, that's, right now we're in August. So you got about a month, I think. About 1 month to have it landed on personaldefensenetwork.com.
Or at least on the editor's desk.
All right, cool. I'll hit you guys offline about that, but I'll get it done. But yeah, so get training. That's what I mean. This tool. Oh, the other thing I want to answer that question. So this can help. And whenever I go to a place, when I was in Oklahoma City, I forgot. Well, I didn't want to check in any luggage, so I couldn't bring a knife on the plane. But it's really easy to find a $20 knife that meets the minimum standards of grip, of accessibility, of openability, and making sure that when you stab, that it doesn't slide down and cut your hand, kind of thing. You could go to anywhere in the world and they're going to have a knife. They're going to have an edged weapon because it's a kitchen tool, right?
Even the airport in the secure environment.
Literally, there's restaurants that have knives there, right?
So yeah, like you said, knives everywhere. So knives are a thing. It's amazing, if you happen to pick up a screwdriver or something like that while you're traveling around overseas, because a screwdriver is a tool, right? And so I need tools a lot and have a tendency to to travel with tools, legally, for that matter. And it's something that typically, and I wouldn't be better at.
Yeah. So it's called martial arts because it's subjective. It's not an objective thing, right? It's an art. It's a craft. And the master artsman, the master craftsman, whether it's a painter or a musician, it's not because they memorized the best songs and can play that really well. It's because they can improvise. They've mastered. They reached a certain level of expertise in their craft that they can improvise. And so I highly recommend everybody to get really good at violence so you can improvise. That these answers become self-evident because different opportunities will present itself wherever you go, right? You just understand how injuries work, how trauma works, and then how to apply that trauma, how to affect that trauma. You could improvise whatever tools you want, at that point. Then everything else is just about context. What's happening in the circumstance? How can you figure out and navigate that circumstance? But a lot of that comes down to your training method.
Right.
If you rehearse, you choreographed, you're not prepared for the unexpected. And
we got another question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
we got another question about knives. Just since we were talking about it, knives in the UK. And obviously there's plenty of countries you're not allowed to carry a knife. And so we would never promote violating the law, but to the degree that knives are available. So if you're in Japan and you're shopping for high-end nice fancy sushi knives, you're going to be able to find them in the retail shops around the streets. And I don't think it's going to be any different than really anywhere you go. When I was in Guatemala, you could buy a machete on every street corner for that matter. So there's stuff that exists inside of that environment that if you needed an edged weapon, it's there. But back to what Mike was just saying, it's understanding, it's understanding trauma, it's understanding violence, understanding the body, because then it's not about the knife or, about the gun. It's, you have the ability to improvise, or adapt.
Well, I mean, with a screwdriver, or is it an ice pick?
I
It's
mean,
a
that I
matter-
can't tell. Like zoom in, because
Yeah.
is
It's
it
pointy.
yeah, it's a pointy, right? And so
Right.
like if you were trying to, I mean, TSA is not going to allow you to fly with an ice pick,
Right.
but if you're someone who uses tools from day to day and you needed tools in your backpack for whatever reason, right? You are allowed to fly with certain tools,
Right. Or
but
I'm
not as a
gonna go
weapon.
get
So
this
don't
desk.
think you can go fly with a tool be a weapon, because I don't think you can do that, right? But if you need tools, you
A
need
nice metal
tools.
pin. This is not a tactical pin. This
Right.
is
Yeah. I carry the
regular
same thing.
Sharpie pin.
Nice. I used to carry a tactical pin, and the problem with the tactical pin is it was tactical,
And it
right?
was
And then all of a sudden, I got, you got whoever screeners asking about it. And I'm like, that's silly, because all I really wanted in life was just a metal pin. So now I've got a metal pin. It's the same thing. It just doesn't look, crazy.
Yeah.
And, it's a pin. So no one's going to bat an eye at it.
right. It could be a tool or it could be a weapon. Right. It's
Right.
all a matter of mindset and how you hold it.
Yes. Yeah, definitely so. Definitely so. It's
And there are tools that like 3D printed Sharpie markers. It's
Well,
a Sharp. It looks like a Sharpie. It's in the shape of a Sharpie, but it's a bit Sharpie. And so
I picked up a like a big, almost I guess it was a polished rock glass marble looking thing about 2 inches the other day. At some point you can expect a video from me on even improvising that, as a defensive tool. And again, it's just something I picked up in a street shop, while traveling this summer.
you bring up an outstanding point, because we tend to go from projectile weapon to edged weapon, but we overlook the most obvious. The blunt weapons are
Right.
everywhere.
They are.
know?
Look, you can get as creative as you want. I used to travel with a padlock because I needed the ability to lock my bag up in places, right? So it's you've got everything around you, to be able to improvise if you needed a weapon, right? And it's when I teach active shooter response courses to teachers and whatnot, it's like, look around in your classroom. It's like I'm looking at 39 and a half different weapons, and I'm going to count that half if that's all I have available, right? But for the other 39, it's like they could make legitimate weapons if you are willing to be violent with them, because you have no other choice in life.
And to simplify for those who don't have any training, target of opportunity, my go-to is square in the middle of the nose. Just do some blunt force trauma there. That'll disrupt their vision with the tears that come pouring out. It'll disrupt their breathing with the blood that comes pouring out. And the other is going to be the back of the head. You got the visual processing centers and the motor cortex. You do significant trauma there if they don't go lights out, because it can be fairly difficult to knock somebody out, right? But when you understand those targets of opportunity, those are some desirable striking points that aren't that hard to access. Now, if anybody's taken any kind of training, that they know that the vagus nerve is on both sides of the neck, blunt force trauma there, or even to the trachea, how to access that with a fully resistant person trying not to let you do that. But if they're in that stage, they're not attacking you, so you're winning the fight, right? And so, yeah, I mean, just some fundamental things, like just punching people in the nose. Just punch them in the nose.
Right. And that's, I mean, if you haven't been punched in the nose, it doesn't matter who you are. It's not, it's not fun, and it's not something that you see directly through, right? It's like, that's one of those areas that whoever you are, it's surprising. And obviously more and more people get used to it. They get struck in the nose a whole bunch, but it's still a very surprising blow to have happen that doesn't even take a lot of strength to, to disrupt what's going on.
Yep. Surprising, disorienting, disrupting. It's a valuable target.
All right, we got one of the comments. Somebody said they hate that they don't travel much anymore, because they don't feel safe without their firearm. That it's hard to leave outside of their, state where they're allowed to travel. And I mean, I already know what my comments would be to that, but since Mike, you're the guest, man.
That's your biggest threat.
Right. What would you coach that person? How would you coach that individual?
That's the biggest threat, is feeling unsafe without your gun. That means that you're incapable to some degree without your gun, right? I don't mean that in a berating or condescending sense, but we need to work on weaponizing that person so they know that the tool is their backup, just like 911 is our backup, right? That it's a tool. It's a leverage that you're applying. It's an option. It shouldn't be your only mode of safety. Now, granted, the reason why I appreciate guns is because I get older, I get less athletic, I may not be able to move as well, right? So there may be some people that have movement challenges, but there are still some things that you may do. So there are certain circumstances, that like their only mode of defense really is the firearm because they're but this is like a logical fallacy. If they're so physically incapable, how can they reliably use a gun, kind of deal? And so what I'm saying is there are some situations where I understand that they can't go out and do martial arts, right? They might have some physical restrictions there. But if there's something else that they can do, there's other ways to apply trauma. Start studying those other methods of applying trauma, whatever is within their capabilities. Start filling up those gaps in their vulnerability. Because if that guy was a bad guy and he wanted to use his gun to do some bad guy things, and someone took away that gun, where does that leave that bad guy? Right? I think we're kind of to the active shooter situation where they're powerless without the gun. And so that's something I want the gun community to really reflect on and digest and process is, without my gun, who am I as a defender, as a protector? Can I still do something? Am I within your means? And there are solutions. If there is a certain situation where I can't do jujitsu, I can't do Muay Thai, I can't do this because of this, and this, man, just message me. I'll help you find a solution. You know what I mean?
And even if it's not the physical skills, right? I mean, obviously, if you can get better at the physical skills, you should, because it's going to give you the confidence to be able to, to be separated from that firearm in plenty of situations. Yeah, but if there's some reason that you are prevented physically from being able to get out there and learn the physical skills, then there's plenty of software skills. You can still get out and travel, and part of traveling is just going to be to do the research on the front end.
Yep.
Understand the area, change your habits, change your behavior, and give yourself the freedom, or choose where you go. Right? I mean, obviously, there's certain places that you're at higher risk of violent crime than others. Not all vacation zones or not all travel hotspots are going to be at extreme risk of of violence.
Yeah, and to your point with the cost benefit thing, the risk benefit thing, the risk may outweigh the benefit of going if you can't bring your firearm. However, you can transfer that risk, right? You could hire protection, or you could bring people, designated defenders, with you. If you have a group of people that you trust that are capable, travel with them. But yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon. There are certain people who don't have the bandwidth to focus on their security. They can't afford to shift their attention, their mind state, to something else because they're business oriented or they're creative oriented, where they need every bit of bandwidth focusing on what task they want to perform. Then they need to outsource their security. That's a thing. It's a thing. There's people who are elder that need to outsource their security, whether you're paying for a professional or inviting friends that who are capable. That is a way to transfer that risk to somebody else and just absorb that protection.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions coming in?
No, I was just checking the different places, a couple of different comments and whatnot, but I think that was all of the questions. I need some sort of program that ties all this together. I can see, all of the locations that this goes out to at one time, and not just jumping around from tab to tab.
Chat roll is clear. I've been checking that.
Yeah, chat roll seemed pretty quiet tonight. Part of me's like, wonder if it's working because everything else seems to be pretty chatty. Well,
I said yes because I keep seeing numbers of viewers go up, and then individuals, like when somebody actually has an account and logs in, I see their name pop up, and I've seen it, like the numbers changing throughout the night. So
definitely so. Before we break, I'll talk about this real quick. I don't know. I was going to talk about it earlier, then I realized it wasn't sitting on my desk. Then my wife brought it up to me. Then we got off the subject of hotel security or Airbnb security and whatnot.
Yeah.
But this little device, and I don't have any connections to the device at all, but this little device is something that I use in Airbnbs and really use it all summer traveling to different places. In fact, we were at one place out in California this summer that had one of those, doors split top and bottom, and the lock was kind of busted, and I can't remember if it was the top or the bottom. The lock, maybe it was the top. Lock was busted on the top side of it. There was a deadbolt on the bottom. And so, this little $15 device saved me real quick for being able to actually lock the door, because otherwise I couldn't have locked the door. And so if y'all haven't seen these, they can work in hotels and whatnot. A lot of, standard doors goes in the latch. You kind of rotate it over to where everything lines up properly, tighten it down. And it really, in about 20 seconds can secure that door that, you don't trust the lock, or you don't trust who's got a key or not, whether it's your bedroom or, the hotel room that you're staying in. It gives you one more layer of security. With that said, it's harder for somebody to get in, which also means it's harder for somebody to get out. And so that is what you have to balance in life, is that the last thing I want is to be finagling with some little tiny gadget at 3 o'clock in the morning in a smoke-filled house that I'm not familiar with because it's on fire and I'm trying to escape, or my kids are trying to escape, right? So you've got to weigh it against that kind of stuff as well. But there's, lots of different options like that. Deryck, you probably have a Wedget, with you. You have one like laying on the desk.
Actually, my backpack is sitting in the other room. Otherwise, I would. My backpack's normally sitting right next to me.
And that's I normally have all that kind of sitting next to me too, but don't at the moment. I've got a green screen behind me, and everything's kind of sitting in the backside of my office and whatnot. But there's lots of different options, to be able to put those different layers in place. And I think that that's going to be part of it, right? Using the cameras when you travel, doing the research on the front end, knowing the places you should be going, knowing the place you should not be going. I use the Spot Crime app, a good bit as well when I travel. It gives you a, free wise anyway, 7-day history of the crime in a specific area. And so I'm able to pull that up and look at it, even when I'm choosing Airbnbs or choosing hotels or something. And I can pull it up and look at it and be like, oh, never mind. We are not staying anywhere around that area, right? And it's before I even booked a place on the front end. And, that's a lot of what security is about, is understanding, where you're trying to travel to. Well, cool. Well, obviously, thanks a bunch for being on, Mike, Deryck. Mike, y'all have any other comments or thoughts before we tear out?
I just wanted to throw out there a question was asked for me. I did a post previously about some of my tools. I also use a Firewaller Purple. It's some engineers from Cisco kind of broke off and did their own thing, and it's a way to spoof the data and everything. But it's basically a portable firewall that has its own VPN. I bring that with me to the hotels, and I connect it to my hotel network, so that way it's secured. It has some firewall rules and such, so you have your anonymity and privacy and all that good stuff. So those are essentially the tools that I travel with to hotels, aside from the locking mechanisms and the strategies and tactics there. But we could go on and on about a bunch of different tools, but I want to make sure I threw that out there because that was asked previously on another.
That post is actually what spawned this show. When you posted up, you were in the hotel, and I saw your firewall and stuff like that. And I sent Barret a screenshot of your post and said, you know what? That's what our topic needs to be: travel and security. Get Mike on. So that was the primer.
Awesome, man. I'm glad I could contribute.
No, it definitely was, and I think if I don't break the show, I'm pretty positive we could talk for a couple of more hours on it. Because we all do pay attention to that kind of stuff when we, travel. And as mentioned previously, Mike professionally has done this as well to help not just keep his family safe, but others in safe that he was in charge of and whatnot. But Mike, man, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
Always enjoy it.
We will be back on is it the first Thursday in September? Let me make sure that's not disrupted by Yep, so it will be first Thursday in September. We'll be back on. We'll be talking about different colors that are available in optics, whether you're talking about an optic for a handgun, optic for a long gun. We've got somebody coming on that knows a tremendous amount about the science behind all of that kind of stuff and how our eyes relate to the different colors that are currently available and what the future looks like with this as well. So I'm really looking forward to that show. Hope to see y'all back for the first Thursday in September show on that topic as well. And thanks again to Primary Arms Online for sponsoring the show tonight. Other than that, guys, y'all have a wonderful night.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.